Ranking 10th among the most economically powerful countries in the world and 4th in Asia in 2022, South Korea has become famous for its fantastic growth from one of the poorest countries in the world to a high-income, developed country in just one generation. During the financial crisis of 2007 to 2008, the country maintained a stable economy and even experienced economic growth during the peak of the crisis. Because of its accelerated industrial and economic development during the 1970s, it formed, together with Singapore, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, the Asian Tigers. Its gross domestic product, GDP, grew, on average, 9.1% per year between 1980 and 1993, one of the highest rates in the world. So in this video we will expand your knowledge by explaining how South Korea went from a country in misery to an extremely important economic power in just one generation. And welcome to the Swift Economy channel. First of all, we need to understand how it all started. In 1953, after a war that killed more than 2 million Koreans, the Korean peninsula was divided into two countries. The division was much more disadvantageous for South Korea, because the north was a developed region concentrating the country's industries, while the south was an underdeveloped region that was mainly dedicated to agriculture. The situation in the country was so serious that the children's main meal was made in schools with powdered milk, which was obtained through humanitarian aid that came from the United States and Europe. In 1960, the population was totally dissatisfied with the government and decided to protest against the system. On that occasion, General Park Chung-hee took power, becoming the country's president, inaugurating a long period of dictatorship in South Korea that lasted 27 years with three different dictators who managed to come to power in a violent way. And with all these problems, dictators, and political and economic instability, it is difficult to imagine the country moving towards development. But that's exactly what happened to South Korea. Some countries managed to grow thanks to economic liberalism, but the country of South Korea followed a slightly different path. General Park Chung-hee did something that would change the country's history forever. He met with the most powerful families in the country. Those few companies in the country that were at this meeting were the owners of Samsung and LG. The general's proposal was the following: the state would give all the support they needed to grow. They were willing to give resources, be guarantor of loans obtained abroad, forgive taxes and debts, among other benefits. But the benefits wouldn't just be for powerful families. The government did not lower taxes for the entire population, created laws that guaranteed the rights of investors and allowed foreign investments with the same conditions that Koreans had. In addition to the government defending legal conditions to ensure investor confidence. Even with all these conditions and benefits, one thing was certain: these companies would need to compete with other international companies, and they needed to be creative, innovative, and with excellent market prices. Although South Korea has few natural resources to grow economically like mining or oil, South Korea had something excellent for its economic growth, which was the manufacturing sector, which is the most labor-intensive. In this way, giant companies of global size were created. Government assistance was almost unrestricted, and it was this aid that was responsible for the country's economic growth. The age of technology. The United States and China have created one of the most innovative corporate competitiveness cultures in the world. That is, every opportunity should be taken advantage of to the fullest. And that happened with LG, which was developing LED TV technology at the same time as its Japanese competitor, Sony. But something curious and interesting happened. Companies realized that it was an extremely expensive technology, to the point that televisions would be manufactured for a price and sold at an even higher price, making it totally unfeasible for the consumer who would pay the final price. So some companies like Sony gave up on the project. But LG was extremely smart, as it took advantage of the knowledge and launched LED screens for cell phones, which, because they were much smaller than other screens, could be produced at an affordable price, and continued to develop the technology until they finally became the first company in the world selling LED TVs at an affordable price. This rapid evolution in the technology sector led the country to invest in another extremely important sector that was a key part for the economy to grow even more: the economy of South Korea, which is the education sector. Schools are prepared to form real calculation machines. And the government spares no efforts or resources to prepare skilled labor for companies in the country. To give you an idea, there are schools that are full-time, and some of them, in addition to having classes on Saturdays, students dedicate up to 18 hours of their day to studies. But such a rigid and competitive education system has its consequences. This very rigorous educational system, based on discipline and respect for hierarchy, does not form young people with entrepreneurial behaviors, but rather causes the opposite effect. In other words, the dream of young South Koreans is usually to graduate, work in a mega company in the country, which are few in macro comparison, and reach a management position. That's why we don't see big startups emerging in Korea like we see in dozens of other countries. These conducts led the country to leave the team of third world countries for a first world country. But not everything is perfect. This government relationship generates numerous suspicions of corruption, leaving the country hostage to several companies. A clear example is that Samsung alone is responsible for about 20% of the country's GDP. Now imagine the chaos it would be if a company like this went bankrupt. South Korea would have a major meltdown and problem to solve. Having said all that, the pandemic had a major aggravation on the country's economy, but the pandemic had a huge impact on the world economy in 2020. However, the South Korean recovery was great, even if it weakened at the end of 2021 and the uncertainty has increased as the pandemic re-emerged. This ended up leaving lasting marks on midterm performance. But in your opinion, what is the future of South Korea? Is it a country that still has a lot to deliver and develop, or is it a country that is totally stagnant and with almost nothing to develop economically and technologically? Comment below. Thank you so much for watching this far. A big hug, and until the next video.